Well, Peter, they left us to the end.
Right.
And
with a hard act to follow.
And exactly, and after this inspiring speech by Ayman Udo, really I think not only is personally so impressive, but I really represents actually hope, definitely regarding the Israeli Palestinians. And with all the tragedy and the problems, I'm really a hopeful person. I think that Ayman and what he represents is really reason for hope. But let's talk a bit about us, if I may. We have so much in common. We both oppose occupation. We both think settlements are a disaster. We are both so worried about Israeli democracy. We are so worried about what's happening to young American Jews. You define the issue. I try to deal with it in my own humble way. We work in the same paper. We even have the same agent. And we wrote these 2 books in recent years that made something of, and attracted some attention. But what are the differences? If there is something, this has been such an impressive and inspiring day. The fact that there are so many people, so much energy. I'll tell you what troubled me during this day. I saw too much unanimity. Haaretz's role in Israel is to be subversive, to be annoying. My role in Haaretz is to be subversive and annoying, and to challenge some of our dogmas. And I think that one of the differences between us is that you go, in this sense, you are the orthodoxy. You are the orthodoxy of the subversives. And my question is, didn't we do anything wrong? Don't we have, as the Israeli Zionist left, don't we have some self-criticism? Netanyahu is awful, the settlers are horrible, the right is terrible, but are we perfect? Don't we have to question if we really want to change? After trying the same peace formula for 20 years, failing time after time, never mind who is, I'm not into the blame game. We failed so many times. Isn't it time to use such gatherings to think afresh? Bill Clinton changed America by changing the Democratic Party. He understood that as much as the Democrats couldn't stand Reagan, Reagan apparently got something right, and he had to change the Democratic Party in order to change America. Obama was elected as a unifier, not only just as an opposition figure. Are we doing this in Israel? Are the pro-Israelis, the people who care so much about Israel, are we doing that? My feeling is that not enough, and I actually think that it would be wonderful to end this inspiring day, but trying to begin this process of asking ourselves also, where did we go wrong, and how can we change?
One of the differences between us is that you're an Israeli and I'm an American. So let me start by talking about the criticisms by talking about the community that I know best, which is the Jewish left in the United States. Since you are more intimately familiar with the Israeli left, and the world in which I live is the world of the American Jewish left. And I think we have made mistakes. First of all, the American Jewish left, and maybe this is something it shares with the Israeli left, has not reached out and recognized the centrality of creating a relationship with the Orthodox community in the United States. It is, in general, if you go to mainstream American Jewish organizations, there is a great deal of sensitivity towards the concerns of people who are religiously observant. And yet too often, when you enter left-wing spaces, there's that lack of sensitivity. I think that's a critical mistake. Just because of demographics in the United States, Orthodox Jews are going to play a larger and larger role in defining our American Jewish community. And although the community leans right, there is a yearning among one segment of especially younger Orthodox Jews for a more open conversation, but very often they never see people on the left who look like them, who can speak in their language, and who will ever do things like saying, we recognize that places like Hebron and the city called Shechem and Beit Lechem are precious to us. We recognize that these places are central to our history. It doesn't mean we believe that Israel needs to have sovereignty over them, but we recognize the pain that would come from not having access to those places, and we will fight for Jews to be able to have access to those places, even if Israel leaves the West Bank. I think that's the kind of thing that the American Jewish left doesn't nearly say enough. I think one other point that strikes me has to do with the way that American Jewish liberals talk about Palestinians and their yearnings. I think we are sometimes not willing and open enough to say what I think you and I think is fairly self-evident, which is that Palestinians are not Zionists. Palestinians do not, I know many Palestinians who I admire and respect and have taught me a tremendous amount. I don't know very many Palestinians who are happy that Israel was created in 1948. And I think it's important for us to state that honestly and to acknowledge that for most Palestinians, their greatest yearning, if they could redo history, would be that a Jewish state was never created in their midst. I think what the right does is it conflates that, the fact that most Palestinians wish in their heart of hearts that there were not a Jewish state, with the assumption that Palestinians could never accept any form of political compromise with Israel. And I think that's the critical mistake, because in political conflicts, inevitably, both sides give up on their deepest desires, their greatest dreams. And political solutions come when people get what they need, but often have to give up their deepest yearnings, just as Jews have to give up our deepest yearnings to have control of greater Israel. But I think it's sometimes on the Jewish left we are not open enough in acknowledging the fact that Palestinians are not liberal Zionists, that Palestinians have a fundamentally different experience of the state of Israel, and that we will not, and we should not expect Palestinians to accept the basic historical legitimacy of a state that for them was a catastrophe. And I think that's something that liberal Zionists are often, in my experience, too unwilling to say.
So you're actually saying that you don't really expect Palestinians to deeply accept the legitimacy of the Zionist project. But let me, sorry, just to make that.
Right.
I want to begin by saying passionately what we agree about, and then to challenge that a bit. Look, I see the present moment as a truly dramatic moment. I really hope we didn't pass the point of no return on the two-state option. But if we did not pass it, as I hope, we will pass it within 5 or 10 years. 10 more years, more of the same, there will not be a Jewish democratic state, and the Zionist project, which I deeply believe in, will be lost. In the process, the battle for Israel's soul, we are losing right now. So the reality is as alarming and dramatic in my mind as it ever was. And in this sense, the analysis of the Zionist left in Israel and here was totally correct. But one of the reasons we are stuck in this situation is that we did not address the legitimate fears of middle-of-the-road, reasonable Israelis. In my mind, Netanyahu is not the sin, he is the punishment. He is the punishment because of our failure to produce the Israeli Clintonian option. For 20 years, we don't have the leaders, we didn't bring the new ideas, we didn't bring the new spirit. And what basically happens, in my mind, is that the Israeli center, the kind of silent majority that is shrinking, but I believe is still there, People opened their hearts to peace in 93. From their point of view, they got terror. The Palestinians got other things, but from their point.
Right.
In 2000, they gave the outstanding offer, never mind what the Palestinians were. They got suicide bombing. 2005, dismantling settlements, you get rockets in Tel Aviv. Until we understand that reasonable Israelis have legitimate fears, that it's not just Jewish paranoia. We are neurotic and paranoid, but it's not only that. And if we do not understand that living in the Middle East, where everything is collapsing, we were also naive and wrong about the Arab Spring 4.5 years ago. If we will not develop a new concept that, on the one hand, sticks to our values, that there is no other way but the two-state way, that we must end occupation, that we must stop settlements, all this, but to put it in a new context, because the basic problem in Israel, and the reason we are losing the battle, and in a big way we are losing, is because of two reasons. Because what I call the Israeli WASPs, the white Ashkenazi supporters of peace, are perceived as detached from reality, as if people did not hear the news from Syria, as if they don't know how individuals and gays and women and Christians are dealt with in Gaza, as if we ignore all that, and we are perceived as detached from our people. We don't give the sense of Ahavat Israel that is the only one that can change Israelis. So in my mind, we can sit in our bubble and smell our own perfume for as long as we want. We'll be pure, we'll be right, it'll be wonderful. People will come here, we will go there. That will not change the reality. At the end of the day, Israel is still a democracy. In a democracy, you have to convince the majority. And I'm hopeful. I think that if we bring the new ideas, the new spirit, and we speak of a different way, we can transform Israel. But right now, we are not doing it.
Right. So look, I think you're right that it's very, very important for people who support the two-state solution not to paint it as a utopia, not to suggest that there are not security risks to having a Palestinian state. Of course there are security risks to having a Palestinian state, especially today when the West Bank would share a border with an Arab world that has a lot of very, very frightening elements. So I think you're entirely right. I also think, and this is something what I think sometimes that the Jewish left in the United States could also do a better job of, it's very important that when our community mourns, that the left mourns along with it. Now, what happens on the left sometimes, in my experience, is there's so much anger and resentment at the fact that our community doesn't mourn Palestinian life, that it is so disproportionate. I remember being in shul once during the Second Intifada, and a rabbi was reading the names of Jews who had died. And a man behind me said, well, he should read the names of the Palestinians. He said this to the guy next to him, and the guy turned to him and said, but we'll be here till mincha, right? There's such an anger on the left sometimes for our callous lack of concern for Palestinian humanity and Palestinian deaths, that it makes the Jewish left sometimes not want to, at least in the United States, in a full-throated way, be part of our communal mourning when we lose even some of our own, like Ezra Schwartz, as we did recently, and that's a mistake. Because at moments of communal mourning and pain, you have to be part of the community. You have to be in it 100%. There are other times to have the political arguments. And yes, there are other times to fight for our community to show some recognition of Palestinian suffering, which it often doesn't. But I think that those moments are very, can be devastating for the left. So I agree. The last thing I would say, though, is you're talking about a very powerful political narrative that has taken place in Israel, which says we gave them everything, we tried to leave, and they responded with terror, right? I just think it's important to remember that very powerful narratives can emerge politically in a country. It doesn't mean they're true, right? In the United States, there was a very powerful narrative that devastated the left in the United States, which said something along the lines of we lost the Vietnam War because our country was stabbed in the back by the anti-war movement. It wasn't true. I'm not suggesting that Palestinian leaders, and especially Yasser Arafat, don't bear some of the blame for the failure of the Oslo process. They do. But we also on the left have to challenge this narrative because historians, we now have a lot of documentary work that's been done on these questions. We actually know a fair amount about what happened, and the story that Israel gave everything the Palestinians could possibly wanted and the Palestinians said no and never counteroffered and responded with terrorism, that is at best a half-truth. The truth is, the truth is that from the Palestinian, the fact that Oslo didn't stop settlement growth was a critical problem for Oslo from the very beginning, maybe a fatal one. And beyond that, that while Israel had offers, and I think Ehud Barak deserves a lot of credit for the offer he made in 2000, and I think Ehud Olmert deserves credit for the even better offer, the Palestinians also had offers. At every state, there was a discrepancy. Israel wanted to annex 6 or 8% of the West Bank because they wanted to keep settlements like Ariel. The Palestinians were willing to accept a 2 or 3% land swap. Israel wanted to keep troops in the Jordan Valley, Israeli troops for a long time. The Palestinians wanted a clearer demarcation. They would have to leave in 3 or 5 years. Israel wanted to give up control of some of the neighborhoods of East Jerusalem, but not all of them. On and on and on and on. We on the left have to tell that story. We actually have the facts on our side. There is a discrepancy between the Palestinian Authority, the PLO position, and the position of even center-left Israeli governments. The tragedy of settlements is they make that discrepancy wider and wider and wider. It's not simply a story of Israel doing everything right and the Palestinians doing everything wrong.
I'll say something very brief on this, because I don't want to get... I think that this kind of scholastic, almost theological yearning among us, to go back to that, is one of the reasons we've lost and we are losing the hearts and minds of Israelis. People, even if you're right, and by the way, I don't think you're right, but on some of the issues, you're definitely the main mistake also in my mind was not to stop settlements. In many ways, if we had just stopped settlement in 1993, we would have been better off than. So I agree with that one. But it's a much more complicated. I don't want to go down that way. Right. But the problem is that as long as we are in this state of mind, we cannot break into the other people. We live. Look. The catastrophe, what has happened to the Israeli left, it evaporated. No, peace was not a concept. Even Meretz didn't talk about peace in the last elections. As Tzipi Livni said this morning, it became a dirty word in Israel. Now, again, a lot of this is because of the right, but we are playing into their hands by not really, look, the last elections in Israel were a referendum on hope and fear. Hope was shallow, fear is deep, and Netanyahu is a genius in manipulating fear.
Right.
This is what happened. If we stick to our dogmas, even if they're right, we are perceived as some sort of old peace church that is detached from reality. I mean, everything, if we don't really look at the reality as people perceive it, without, it's not the academic question, even if the academic. But if I may, I want because we are short on time, and there is the other issue that is so much up your alley that we must refer to. You really, and I give you all the credit for that, you in many ways defined the problem of the young Jews of the diaspora, especially the young American Jews, years ago. I find myself spending my life now dealing with it, going from campus to campus, listening to people, talking to people. And where I don't represent the Israeli middle-of-the-road people, I represent young American Jews and talking to the Jewish leadership and to Israelis, wake up, we are losing our future. How bad do you think is it? And can you analyze what is your perception of the crisis of the millennials regarding Israel and regarding the organized Jewish life in this country?
Before I get to that, I just want to say one more thing on the Israeli side. I can't resist, sorry. I think you're totally right that the left suffers when the left doesn't recognize people's fears. I just think it's also important to say the left also suffers when it doesn't actually stand up for its principles. And when I look at the last Israeli election, I do not see in Bougie Herzog a man who actually stood up for the principles of the left in talking about the problems of the occupation. I see someone Far more similar to the way Democrats in the United States reacted after 9/11, who basically tried to pretend this issue of security was not an issue in which there was a difference between the right and the left, and played to domestic issues and put himself in a position in which he would be out-demagogued. So I just want to put that on the table. In terms of younger American Jews, I think we have multiple crises, and believe it or not, not all of them are Benjamin Netanyahu's fault. The deepest crisis we have is of our own making. It's the fact that we have the most Jewishly illiterate population of people in the history of the Jewish world, perhaps. We are a community which has produced radical literacy, and that radical literacy is meeting up with radical acceptance. And what that means is a whole generation of people who don't care a lot about Israel because they don't care a whole lot about anything Jewish. That's not Israel's fault. That's our fault. That's on us. Why do we have the weakest Jewish school system of any major diaspora in the world? Why do we spend more money funding Holocaust memorials than we do Jewish schools? Right? That's but I'll just say, because I know I'll give you the last word, and I know we don't have much time. What's remarkable is even among those young American Jews who are committed, who do care, younger non-Orthodox rabbis, for instance, the independent Minyan movement, there you also see this kind of alienation, and it's because of the difficulty they have in reconciling what they think of as American Jewish culture, which its commitment to liberalism and universalism and human rights, and an Israel that they see is becoming more and more hyper-nationalistic and militaristic. And they are extraordinarily offended by the fact that an American Jewish leadership, which claims that part of the Jewish ethos is to have open discussion, will shut them down when they ask questions beyond a certain limit. I am not a supporter of the boycott, divestment, sanction movement. I am not a member of Jewish Voices for Peace. But I think we make a critical mistake when we do not allow people to ask those very hard fundamental questions, not just about Zionism itself, because Judaism is bigger than Zionism, and when young kids have difficult questions, we as a community should not shut them out. We should have enough confidence in our answers that we can talk to them. And I think you are doing some of that, and you're experiencing it. So I'm interested in knowing, and I think maybe this will have to be the last word, I'm interested in asking you, because often outsiders, starting with de Tocqueville, can see things that we Americans can't always see as well. What do you see when you go out there?
So first of all, I agree with you about the Jewish side, but on this issue, I will take the more critical approach regarding my country, my nation, and my government. I think that, look, the day began with Amos's commitment to Zionism, which I appreciate so much. Zionism, the Zionist Project, is especially needed for non-ultra-Orthodox Jews. Ultra-Orthodox Jews can survive as Jews without an Israel. It is non-ultra-Orthodox Jews and non-ultra-nationalist Jews who need Israel so much, not because I expect you people to make Aliyah. My Zionism is completely different. I really think I want two modes of Jewish existence. I want a flourishing, wonderful diaspora, and I want a flourishing, benign Israel. But the two are interdependent, and we will not have a future without you, and you will not have a future without us. My governments have been betraying that mission. By surrendering to ultra-Orthodox politics and ultra-nationalist politics, we are driving away the young Jewish generation in the diaspora. Rather than Israel being a beacon of hope, of inspiration, we are making it gradually a source of embarrassment and confusion. So I think that the need, in my mind, it goes against the grain of Zionism. And in my mind, I think there is no other way but to renew effective, inspiring, progressive Zionism. On the one hand, we have to understand, we have to give, and this is where we have to give the positive. Israel is a man-made miracle. Israel is fundamentally astonishing. The fact that we built this home against all odds, The fact that fundamentally it is a democracy, it's a remarkable achievement. But we've been endangering it, we've been tainting it, gradually been destroying it now for decades. So the mission, the problem young Jews in the diaspora that I listen to all day long, they see two Goliaths. On the one hand, Israel is perceived more and more as a Goliath, and sometimes the Jewish community is perceived as a Goliath. And for their generation, this is unbearable. So the mission, and I think this is a nice note to end on, the mission is to make Israel a David again. There is no life for us if we won't make Israel the benign, liberal democracy it must be.
With that, we'll end. I agree it's a miracle, and I think that making it that is going to require a lot of struggle.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure.